All right. Hey, okay. Please join the Discord. If you're not in the Discord, you're doing something wrong. Okay. I'm gonna give everybody a chance to scan the QR code. Okay, we're going. Please sign in. This is how you get free pizza, and we keep track of you. Is the signing up? Today is not a good day. Okay, can someone do the sign in, please? We good? Okay, sign in's there. Please sign in. I'm going to remind you later, so is Anthony, but please sign in. Very true. All right, check the calendar. That's how you know when we're having all our fabulous events. It's pretty nice, pretty nice. Also, join the mailing list. That's how you get those sweet, sweet weekly updates. Also, how you get updates of stuff that's on the calendar. Okay, listen. Next week is IRSEC. Oh yeah. I mean, if you're on blue team, you should know what IRSEC is, but next week's IRSEC. And because next week is IRSEC, we're not having a general body meeting. So remember, there is no meeting next Friday. Please do not show up. You will be very sad and lonely because I will not be here. What? Anyway, I'm going to ignore whoever said that. Can I get a round of applause for Mr. Ross McKee because he is now the new junior off lead. Oh yeah, where's Ross at? Is he even here? Ross, I love you, Ross. All right, yeah. Everybody, can we clap for Ross again? He's so swag. Okay. All right. Okay, meet the sponsors. Keep clapping. Keep going. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We love them here. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Follow our social media. There are some very cool posts going on there, especially the Instagram. It's some heat there, man. It really is. You should follow us. All right. Today is a very glorious day. We'll be presenting our red team with Mr. Jason, Miss Annika, Mav, and me, young traffic cone. Okay. I don't know who put that there. Okay, can we get a round of applause for everyone? But that's not me. Come on. All right. Okay. Where's Annika at? Okay, I'm gonna let Jason start this because I don't know what's happening.
All right, what's happening? Yeah, so the strat here is we'll stay up here.
Okay, can I sit
Okay,
beside
cool.
one?
And I have slide notes, so we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
I figured it out.
Yeah. So you guys want to stand here for the entire time? Me and Never doing the intro.
Oh, so I'll sit down.
Well, it's up to you. It's up to you.
I can sit down. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll
So
sit
it's
down.
like all right, cool. This thing on? No, it's not on. It's great. Yeah. Okay. Are you recording? Hello, everybody. Did I not pick it up? Am I over the mic or not? No. Okay, I'll move it up. All right, is that better? I don't know if that worked. I don't think it worked. Maybe I'll just hold it. Thoughts. Boom. All right. So welcome one and all to Red Team Education. This is just a small part of what we do on the Red Team here. We also do weekly recruiting meetings every Thursday, except for like this week because we didn't have any slides. And we also do Red Team development on Sundays, and we do Red Team competitions when we go to UB and IRSEC and other fun things. So yeah, we're gonna bring you a little slice of our program today. We're gonna talk about what Red Team is. We'll have our subject matter experts, Annika and Kenny, come up to talk about Linux and Windows networking. Then I will talk about networking stuff. Then we'll do some wrap up, and we'll be off and away. So let's get after it.
All right, so we're going to start with a quick overview of what you should know, what you can know, getting into the red team. These are the things that we do all the time. So first of all, let's clarify what red team is. There's three kinds of, you can put offensive security in three little buckets. One is penetration testing. So when you're pen testing, you are trying to break into a system. That's the important part. We have some application, we have some network. We're trying to get into that system and test the security of it. And that differs a little bit from red team, which is where you're not just trying to get into a system, but you're actually trying to test the blue team incident response capabilities. So this is not about just getting root on a box. This is about actually trying to move your way through a network without being detected, trying to test that defense, both the human and technical component of that. So it's sort of full scope. Granted, scope is a very important term. We'll talk about it about scope, but that idea is totally through with red teaming. It's not just about exploits. We're trying to also create persistence, develop certain capabilities, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then that's different a little bit. Okay. That one, last part is vulnerability assessment. So basically testing the rules and requirements of a system. So can you actually get in? And it's also both like from the management side. So you'll be doing this continuously. You'll have programs in place to kind of track and catalog and eventually respond to vulnerabilities, classify them, and all that stuff.
So, yeah, with penetration testing, you're enumerating your attack surface finding vulnerabilities. So your port scans, you're enumerating over the AD. You're doing a lot of fun techniques that you can learn all about in RVAP. You're trying to like own as many systems as possible, starting from nothing. And generally speaking, it might be like a black box situation where you have no knowledge of the system. Maybe it's white box where you have some knowledge, or like all the knowledge. But generally speaking, like you're there for the client. They want to understand what's happening within their stuff, and you're like writing a very detailed report, and you're just like finding flaws and like giving them some mitigation stuff that they can work on. With red teaming, you're doing lots of stuff to the system. Generally, you're allowed to pre-bake, so you have access to the system before the blue teamers do, as we're trying to create a post-exploitation environment. Our goal is to always have access to every system at all times. It's called persistence in shorter vocabulary. Try not to get caught, being a little more sneaky. With red teaming, you can get into this like a fun thing called adversary emulation, where you might like take some TTPs, their tactics, techniques, protocols, procedures, from an APT and like emulate what they would do in that situation to kind of like give a more in-depth experience. And then we kind of write some reports, but not like as detailed. And this is, as Matt said, this is more focused on like training the blue team and all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So the other thing about red teaming, in one word, it's persistence, persistence, persistence. Always have a way back in. So no matter what blue teams find or what they put up on their firewall or whatnot, but there's some way that we can get back in to maintain control of that system. So if you don't have persistence, you don't have access. Period. Basically, one is 0 and 2 is 1. So always have backups. And then also we're going to be kind of paying attention. Part of the ways that we do that is we misconfigure some services. So you might have required services you have to keep running. If there's something on your box that has to stay running, it's a pretty good place to put persistence. And yeah, honestly, this is more for competitions, but we do occasionally do a little trolling on red team. We kind of mess with blue teams, get inside your head, mess with some of your peripherals, all that fun stuff. And this is usually more for competitions in real life, but honestly, this does sometimes happen in real life too. So yeah, red teaming, once you're in the system and you own everything, it's okay to have a little bit of measured fun. All right, so we can talk about vulnerabilities, exploits, threats, things you should know about. A vulnerability is a weakness or a flaw in a system. So it doesn't have to be a code system, it can be any system. But usually this manifests as like specific code errors, insecure input sanitization, all that stuff. You might have issues with permissions, access control issues. So somebody can do more than they should. Maybe they can escalate privileges when they shouldn't be able to. Weak credentials, it's very common. You might have weak credentials on your box. Maybe you don't change your credentials. Pretty good way to get in. So these are all vulnerabilities, some way to get into a system. And an exploit is basically something that takes advantage of that vulnerability. So if you have, let's say there's a buffer overflow in some network stack, maybe you take advantage of that with a buffer overflow exploit, something that actually controls that program and then eventually leads to compromise. So the idea with exploits is that you can kind of stockpile them over a while, and once you see a vulnerability, you can deploy an exploit against it. So exploits are that specific component that actually takes advantage of that vulnerability. And so there's Metasploit modules, there's all sorts of C2 frameworks that sometimes implement exploits as well. You have ExploitDB, which has a whole bunch of public known exploits. They're usually just small code snippets that take advantage of known vulnerabilities. So, yeah, this is a classic one. So the idea of a threat, what is that? It's usually something or someone or some group that's trying to cause you harm. That threat has a goal. They're trying to get after something. Maybe they're trying to compromise your confidentiality of your system, integrity, data integrity. They want to change how much money they have on your bank. Or maybe it's like us, they're just trying to take advantage of your availability requirement. You want to take your stuff down and just cause havoc. So a threat is somebody that is, trying to do some damage. They have a certain amount of resources. They have a certain amount of drive. They want something to a certain degree. And so when you're thinking about defense, you also kind of think about what you have to think about what you're up against. How much are they willing to spend to get into your system? But in the case of Red Team, I mean, really, we're just here for fun. We're trying to test your skills, and so we're trying to get in with the ways that we can afford to. So yeah, hand over those score checks. We're gonna one way or another. Let's talk about attack life cycle.
Yeah, so the attack life cycle. This is something that actually comes from MITRE. I'll talk about the MITRE attack framework in a moment. This is, if you look at like all known like cyber attacks, this is how they all kind of structure themselves. First, your threat or your threat actor will start with an initial recon. They'll understand what's happening, where it's happening, when it's happening, why. Like I said, everything that it can about the system. So this is when you do you can do passive and active recon. So you can like find somebody up. You can like do some OSINT here, figure out like who works there, what they do for a living, all that good stuff. You can do some port scanning, figuring out like if there's any like open ports that are going to be open, any vulnerabilities you can take advantage of. And this is where you get like all of the information that you can get. And then you take the information and you write an exploit and you get your initial compromise. This is like your single foothold, and then you need to use this foothold to establish like a better one and gain persistence, escalate your privileges, and then you start going into the cycle where you like once you're in and you've escalated your privileges, maybe you were a web user like Apache, or then something you can get like an actual user after that. So then you can do some more recon. Maybe there's like an internal like DNS server that's serving records for like Kerberos, or there's a time server that you get out of sync or something like that. So you find all these other stuff, you move to them, you establish more backdoors, and then you kind of keep going until you can get to your goal, which is whatever your mission is. And then once you've done that, then you're good. So generally you'll see like this cycle right here happen for a while. And yeah, so that's the attack life cycle. Any questions so far? Yeah. Cool. You guys learned about vulnerabilities, threats, and exploits in like 140, right? Yeah. Cool. So that wasn't like completely new. That's great. So yeah, MITRE attack matrix. So I mentioned techniques, tactics, and protocols, procedures earlier on networking protocols. So if you go to this, if you go to like this website, click on that word, you can get like this big matrix of like the attack life cycle and like all the different things you can do to be part of the attack life cycle. It's really cool. So there's 13 different tactics they have on the top, which is initial access, execution, persistence, fluid escalation, and a bunch of other ones. And all of these things are techniques that you can use to do that thing. They have ones for Windows networking and Linux. So this is not only like a thorough documentation on like how every single threat actor works, but also a great place to go if you need a tool idea. So you can go look here. Here's something you want to like write, like defense evasion. You can look at like the techniques underneath it. Like defense evasion, you could go look at binary padding and go figure out something to do with that. Or we actually had somebody write a bits job last year, which is really cool. Came right from the MITRE attack framework. So Yeah. Attack life cycle, like attack framework, very simple.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so there's a whole lot of different offensive techniques that kind of boils into this. But past your initial access, you're trying to get privileges. You're maybe trying to just get credentials. But in the end, usually in like most practical scenarios, you're also trying to get like data to collected and exfilled. So there's a lot of defenses in a real network. IDS, IPS. You might have like deep packet inspection going on. So that part of like collection and exfiltration, using a covert channel, all that fun stuff, that becomes very, very important when you're actually trying to get data out of a network as well. So these are just different techniques that you'll hear about. They are distinct, but a lot of them are going to share the same like vulnerabilities. They might have different, specifics, but for the most part, it's all about the same. All right, so we can talk a little bit about red teaming in general and about how it actually works in competitions, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to red team in competitions. There's a couple of distinctions, a couple of differences between that and the real world, and so we can talk about that for a little bit. All right, so for a competition, we're trying to get initial access. This is our deployment stage. So incident response competition, like IRSec, you're responding to an incident. So we're going to cause that incident for you. We're going to deploy some tools. We're going to take on some services. We're going to deploy all sorts of fun stuff. And that's our initial access stage. So when you're coming onto the boxes, you can assume that we're already there because you're responding to that incident. This is right in the seat, game time. After that, we're trying to establish some persistence. So those, backdoors and stuff are going to have some kind of persistence mechanism. We're thinking a lot about defense evasion. We want access to your credentials. We also want to have command and control of your systems. So just full total compromise. And then after that, we also want to know a little bit about that system, see what's on there. There might be specific data points that we want to get a hold of. That kind of depends on the competition a little bit. But at that point, we already have access, and so we're trying to use it. And honestly, we're not doing a whole ton of privilege escalation. For the most part, we already have the privileges. So that part is happening already. We might do a little bit of lateral movement. That does happen sometimes in competitions. But after that, exfiltration, most of the time, we're just here after your services in a competition environment. So that's pretty much it.
So preparation, your first and most important objective. So in every engagement that you're going to do as like a red teamer, you're going to have some sort of background information. In our competition settings, which emulate the real world, we have a packet. And if you are a blue team first, like the packet just dropped and blue announcements in the channel. So take a look at it and see what you can find. Do your preparation, as we would say. So in this topology, you have IP addresses, you got support services, you got host names, you have list of services that are being run. And with that, you can make plans and you can determine like what you're going to do when. If you want to like drop a backdoor for a web service, or if you want to like set up a covert channel using like a communication protocol that is used in that specific topology. These are all kind of like things that you can do when you make your plan, and then you do some testing of your malware so nothing breaks. Right? Everybody, look at me. Raise your hand, real quick. Repeat after me. I state your name.
I state your name.
Promise to never drop any malware that I haven't tested ever. Thank you. So
that is an important part, guys. Seriously.
So you can talk to Grand White if you have questions. Generally speaking, within the RIT red team, we also happen to be on the black team, so the questions we already know the answer to. But when we go to UB, we just bang Vasu's line, and then he gives me bullshit answers, and then it's annoying. We have some team organization, so yeah, team organization. I'm not gonna get too much into this because our team structure will be evident next week at IRSec. I don't want to spoil anything right now, but generally having a leader, having good communication, and understanding who is in charge of maintaining access and who's in charge of running breaks, and like actually having different roles on your red team is pretty important. Otherwise, you're just disorganized and like as an example, because this never happened. Maybe like you have bad communication and then Windows malware never gets dropped. So moving on to deployment. So yeah, as we said, we in a packet. We already know the IP layouts. That means that we can write some sort of inventory file. We also have credentials to the boxes that maybe they don't have root, but maybe they have sudo privileges. So we can go and change root password, something that we know, and then we have root. We also know the OSs, and so we can kind of like get everything set up so that when it comes to time to deploy, we just hit enter and everything works. And it's generally not all about speed. It's more about doing things the right way the first time. But there have been situations where we need to deploy at minute 0, and it is about speed. So we have both, and like we have the skill to do that. So this and like getting the speed comes from knowing exactly what your dropper does, knowing exactly what your malware does, and exactly how long it's going to take them for them to do those things. So this just kind of comes with like being comes like with the time. Kind of like you get some notches on the belt, basically. So deployment. I'll give this one to math.
Sure. All right, so like a hand-woven wool sweater, we've been passing this slide down for many generations. But there are lots of different tools that you can use for deployment. The one that we end up using most of the time is Ansible. So if you're on Black Team, you might have heard of Ansible. But it's a really awesome tool. You can use it to write all of your deployment as like its own sort of like YAML syntax. And it deploys over SSH, over WinRM, PSRP, whatever you have open to you on that system, Ansible kind of works on it. Basically just pushes a bunch of auto-generated Python code over the network and loads up whatever you want. Cool thing about it is that it's idempotent, so if we have to rerun the Ansible like 10 times, it's not going to break the box. It's only going to deploy what it needs to. Yeah, it's a little bit slower, but you can do some speed improvements as well. And for the most part, if we're going to be deploying tool these days, we'll be using Ansible. As part of that, we'll have an inventory file. So if you've done Black Team, you'll know what this is verbatim, but an inventory file is basically a list of all the hosts on that competition network. So that includes host names, that includes the actual IP address, any special users we might need to use. All of that is configured from within there so that when we run like Ansible playbook, it will just automatically know what user to log in with for each box, what the host name for that box is, all that fun stuff. We can also put additional variables for that stuff. Ansible has variables, and we can do it by group. So we can say Windows is going to use this connection strategy, or it's going to use this user, or this password. Maybe on FreeBSD we want to use this specific user to privilege escalate, or we want to put it on this file location, all that fun stuff. And then we collect all these different tasks, dropping backdoors, adding users, setting permissions. All those tasks are grouped into roles, like deploy this tool or deploy this other tool on Windows, all that stuff. And then we basically take those roles and put them into playbooks. A playbook is like a competition will be a playbook. And so that will deploy these roles against these hosts. But yeah, that's pretty much how it works. There's a whole bunch of other tools. A lot of times we'll just use SSH and like Bash or something. We'll curl down to script. That works fine. Got other tools like Deckboard. We test all of our Ansible roles, so we tried it with Molecule, which is a really cool testing framework. But the nicest part about having a good deployment strategy is when you test it, you'll know that it's going to work like 99% of the time. And you can be very confident if you have to make a last minute change that you can do that and not crash anything, which is really, really good for us. Nice. Sure. Persistence is all about having a way in. So we're trying to run code on your box. 1 is none and 2 is 1. That's the one I was trying to say before. But really, this is like the bread and butter of Red Team. We want to have access to your stuff at all times. And we want to test your skills, right? We want you guys to find stuff. We want you to fill stuff into your IR report. But we also want to keep access. So we are thinking a lot about persistence and multiple methods and all that stuff. So yeah, we're just going to keep on adding a whole bunch of ways back in. Some stuff you'll catch, some stuff you won't. But in the end, we'll always have that access because, yeah, the house always wins. So sorry. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about listening shells.
So, bind shells. These are shells that listen on the port. So, actually, I'm gonna skip to where it's somewhere right here. This slide.
Yeah.
So, we totally didn't check the organization of these slides. Bind shells versus reverse shells. So, the bind shell The attacker is reaching out to the client or to the victim. They're initiating the connection. So generally speaking, bind shells are going to get blocked by like the firewall that's sitting like right here, because in general, like incoming traffic is blocked. But think about like how you establish like trust as like a big thing in a network. When you are the client and you're reaching out to somebody, generally, since you're running that command or you're doing that action, the firewall can trust that you know what you're doing. So we have reverse shells where the packet starts at the server, the client, the victim, and it reaches out to the attacker. This one gets allowed by the firewall because it's coming from like a known good place. So tagging back over here. So yeah, bind shells like you have a service that's listening on a port on the victim, and you have the client, you have the server, like your C2, your like a one-off shell, whatever it is, reach out and try to connect to that port. Think of it as like SSH password. You just establishing some sort of connection. You can use netcat to do this. You could write a service backdoor using anything you want. That's kind of up to you. These are kind of like where red teaming gets started with these types of shells. So callbacks, reverse shells, beacons, they're all somewhat synonymous here. These are a bunch of examples, but as I said, like these are things that are going to call back. They're going to start the connection from the victim and go back to the C2, the server, wherever it is. So yeah, so these are some examples. You want to look at them. All pretty cool. So covert beacons. So simple beacon works by making socket connection using TCP, UDP, or another protocol on top of that. So like extrapolating the HTTP, FTP, SSH, all that good stuff. And you can use those like layer 7, layer 6, layer 5 protocols to hide your traffic. You can like malform some DNS packets. You can send data over HTTPS. There's a data section in an ICMP packet that you can use. Pretty much every single protocol out there has some form of data that you can send in the packet. So then you can like create a listener to listen for that packet type. There's lots of libraries out there to do that. So it's pretty simple. Describing this is pretty simple, but actually like writing it is not so simple. If you want some examples, you got Discord Go. There's a C2 out there called Battle Paddle / Cattails. That's malformed DNS, which is really cool. And you can encrypt your commands if you're using like HTTPS or some sort of like, you can use like SSL to like secure socket your traffic.
True. So true.
Very true.
Yeah. So one method for persistence is some kind of auto run functionality. This depends on your OS and also the software installed on it. But cron jobs are a good example for like Unix-based stuff. There's task scheduling, like on Windows. There's files that load code every time you log in. There's services. There's startup commands. In the registry, loads of places to put stuff. So this kind of varies a little bit, both on iOS, but auto runs are usually low-hanging fruit for the most part for us because they often will be used for legitimate purposes and they're pretty easy to find. You just have to know about them going in. So definitely check these out if you're blue teaming. We'll also do some misconfigurations of your services. So like web shells are a good example. Not really even misconfiguration, but taking advantage of code execution on your box. So you might have a web server, maybe it's a LAMP stack running PHP. We'll upload a web shell to that. So it's one page on the web root that just lets us execute commands to the PHP user. Or maybe a higher level user if we did some actual configuration misconfiguring. Some issues with SSH. Maybe you have SSH keys that you don't expect. Do you really need root login? All that stuff. We do, but you might not. So maybe you have RDP. Is that just open? Can anyone use psexec? Pan backdoor. Like, do your passwords actually matter? Have you tried a wrong password? Does it let you in anyway? Weird. Maybe we'll add some users. Do they all need to have sudo permissions? Does every single user have no password access to sudo? Does sudo include a README file from like, I don't know, a random directory? That's kind of weird. Does John add a local admin to your Windows box? Yeah. Does he add himself to the RDP user group? Is that needed? So you're going to have to spend some time on these boxes, like combing through both what's in the packet and what's actually there. Find the discrepancies and adjust accordingly, because most of the time you're going to have, in real environments too, you're going to have permissions that aren't fully configured correctly. Lots of hands, lots of eyes over lots of time without like a central body is going to usually cause some issues over time. So check these out. Yeah, so we'll also be doing a little bit of snooping from time to time on what you're doing, no pun intended. So we'll look at what you're doing. We'll steal some data. We'll take a look at your firewall rules, like what are you trying to do to kick us out? Can we do anything about it? The answer is yes. Maybe your password's there, nice password. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. And we'll also take a look at what kinds of files that you're changing. Did you download any tools? Are those tools actually saved? Did you check the hash on them? You should. Yeah, lots of different ways that we'll be doing day of to actually follow what you're doing with our access.
Yeah, a little story about passwords. A competition or two ago at the illustrious University of Buffalo, there was a blue teamer who, I don't know, one of his teammates was named. His name's Jason, and changed one of the passwords to Jason is smelly. And this was like minute 2 of the competition. So we saw that come in, our password collectors, and we were like, huh, what's going on over here? So I walked over to them, paid them a little visit, gave them a stern talking to, and that password was soon changed. So a little tip, if you guys are going to go blue team, make your password something that is strong, but don't make them something that's rude to red team. We don't take it very kindly.
Yeah, don't try to add everyone.
Yeah. Yes, question.
Lie about not kicking off red team. I remember that somebody had to apologize partway through a competition so they could actually compete again because apparently they insulted some red teamers, like made fun of them, and then red team just shut everything down, and they couldn't resume until they made a public apology, which was then more has to leave the competition.
Usually we will not lock you out. So this is an important thing. On red team, you will not deliberately lock people out. Now, granted, if you lock yourself out, you might be in that scenario. So a good thing on blue team is to have some kind of access. Make sure your access is good. It really bites when we're the only ones that have access to your box, because then you're not going to have a lot of luck keeping services up. So yeah, watch out for that. But on red team, when you join red team, we're not going to be like changing passwords or like logging people out of boxes and locking them out completely. It's just not what we do.
So some topology for you guys. So this is like this little cloud over here is all of the blue team boxes or whatever infrastructure we're attacking. Then generally speaking, we're going to have all of our beacons coming out. We'll have numerous C2s, and sometimes we'll have like a C2 that controls other C2s. In that situation, it's called a team server. So C2s, control, they orchestrate a bunch of clients. They manage a bunch of clients, and then when you have like a good red team, you will have a team server which orchestrates all of the C2s. So you can issue one command to one like box, like you issue one command through your team server that gets pushed out to all the C2s, and all the C2s will run it on all the clients. And that way, like you don't have to say like, oh, who's got access to box X, and then you have to like scramble. That's just kind of like a mess.
Yeah, there's a lot of arrows on this diagram, but you'll notice that there's no arrow connecting you, the small white cloud there, up to our team server directly. So there's a hierarchy here. The other nice thing about that kind of diagram is that we can switch out these C2s whenever we want. So we can switch protocols, IP addresses, all that fun stuff. So yeah, don't focus on blocking IPs or you might have some service issues. Yeah, so what is this thing C2? You might have heard this a lot. It's on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's all over the place. You might see CNC as well. Most of the time people call it C2 these days. It's command and control. So we have an agent on your box that's going to be communicating with one of those C2s you saw a second ago. It's going to get commands from that C2, and it's going to report the results back. There might be some other functionality there too, but for the most part, especially when you're looking at it from a network perspective, that's what you'll be seeing. A lot of routine connections to the same spots, trying to grab commands. You might see those IP addresses change. You might see domain names that you don't recognize. You might see data packets that are added to protocols you don't expect. So C2 is basically the bread and butter red team. This is how we're actually doing things most of the time. And it's, for the most part, when you see a whole like red line on the scoreboard, probably some C2 going on. Yes, we talked about that already. We should probably get through. Team server coordinates the agents. Well, actually, C2s coordinate the agents. Team server coordinates the C2. We'll also have some proxies. So maybe you've heard of this. Basically, it just hides the IP address for something. So reverse connections will have a reverse proxy. Forward connections, like incoming traffic, will have a SOX proxy or something like that. And now we're going to turn it over to Annika for Linux red teaming. So this is the fun part.
Yeah.
Set up.
Sweet. So my name's Annika. I'm happy to be presenting. Just to scan, how many people use Linux in this room? Amazing. Awesome. Okay, so today we're just going to be talking about Linux red teaming. And the most important thing about like red teaming in Linux is that once you understand the underlying like characteristics of Linux, it becomes really easy to exploit. It almost feels like it was built to exploit it. So our first thing we're talking about is initial access. And some of these things we already went over in earlier slides, but it's just to sort of tie it back to Linux. And so the initial access is your initial foothold. So it's either like hijacking vulnerable services. There's weak default reuse credentials. There's weak SSH keys, things that are open, have read-write permissions that you can switch. And then there's also social engineering and things like that. So for persistence in Linux, there's a ton of different things. We've got that nice picture. So the like hijack booting, schedule tasks, auto starts. So that's going to be things like systemd. We're going to look at daemons, and then you can like modify shell commands. You can basically get scheduled tasks to run malicious code for you. So it's like automating our persistence, which makes it nice and easy. And so you can also hijack binaries. So that's going to look like SSH, or sorry, other commands that you're going to run, and that will trigger malicious commands along with it. And so that's another way to automate persistence. And so you can also modify shells. So that's going to look like SSH, or you can have reverse shells and all things like that. And then when we look at, let's see. Okay, cool. So backdoor services will also occur. So that's going to, depending on which thing we're looking at, it's going to either be backdoors with passwords or other ways that we can access. Okay. So services in Linux are always running in the background, and it's pretty simple to make a service. So that's going to be triggered all the time at whatever intervals and do whatever services that you want it to do. And so the best part is you can hijack these legitimate services to hide your traffic and also continuously execute. And so there's also other services that we already talked about for C2s. So that's going to be like SSH, HTTPS is more the goal for that, to hide your traffic, SMTP, DNS, ICMP. So you can, like they said, there's header files that you can just modify and have it run or tunnel your traffic as well. So we're going to talk about systemd a little bit. And that is basically the main system manager for Linux and what it's supposed to do, like system scheduling and general management, but it's really nice to hijack and execute your malicious payloads. And so you can get root persistence and user persistence. Root is ideal, and that's going to be in the etc systemd system or userlib systemd system. And so daemons are another background service, which systemd is actually system daemon. It's at process ID 1. And there's basically everything in Linux also has a daemon if it's a service. So that's going to look like HTTPD, SSHD, telnetd, and all of those. Oh, did I say it wrong? No. Okay. So cron jobs are just another example of scheduled tasks. So basically, you can program it to be every second of every month. Sorry, you can say every minute of every hour or every day. You can basically go throughout the time and have it. So you can basically have it executing every minute. And so those are important things to look at to see what malicious scheduled tasks are running in your system. And they can also be run as root. So that's something we'll see in privilege escalation. And so if you get root, then that's what you look like. And so that's basically going from initial unprivileged up to a full admin shell with full access. And so there's a number of ways that you can get escalated privileges. We're going to look at kernel exploits a little bit more in depth. There's manipulation of environment variables like SUID, GID, and other user permissions. You can hijack services, which we already talked about. There's a lot of privilege schedule tasks, which we already mentioned, that you can sort of hijack. And then you can abuse sudo, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Basically, it, let me see. So like hijacking pseudo tokens, pseudo caching, and manipulating binaries to run as root. And then we can also see writable sessions and overwrite SSH keys and things like that. Okay, so a little talk about kernel exploits. This is where it gets kind of fun and a little scary, because in the kernel you have the highest permissions, lowest level interfacing between the hardware and the software. And so basically every process, everything that's happening on the computer you can own in the kernel. And so since everything in Linux is a file, every configuration is also just in a file, and you can hijack and manage that from the kernel, and user space would never even know it's happening. And so this could look like manipulating kernel images and processes, so taking advantage of memory. You can modify and invoke system calls, or you can even run user space programs with kernel space privileges, and that's super dangerous. And then you can also even just create your own fake file system. So you might be operating not in a real file system, or you might be hiding in one that you can't see. And then also interrupts. So that's going to be from your hardware to your software. And so you can hijack those and things like keyloggers and device drivers. And so just general misconfigurations. So it's sometimes hard to even see them. And so it's important to understand how the Linux services work, so then you can know what their configurations are supposed to look like. And so permit root login, or there's no passwords, or you use the same password everywhere, or it's default. And then we also have like PAM backdoors, having unlimited pseudo caching timeout, and messing around with binaries. So you run things as root. Okay, so here's just some random tricks, remapping keys, and every time you enter a program and hit enter, it runs a different command, so it's going to flush your IP tables. You can make your keyboard beep. These are just dumb little things you can do with pseudo terminals and the kernel and things like that, interfacing with it. So now it's Windows. So yeah.
All right, that's another question.
Yeah.
So what was the KML acronym?
Let me see. Oh, yeah, the kernel mode Linux. So there's Linux kernel modules, and then there's kernel mode Linux. The kernel modules are going to be like your device drivers, and then the kernel mode Linux is running user space with kernel permissions.
Is that different? I've heard a different KML. The L is
Yeah.
kernel mode lanyard.
Yeah, this is a different one. Okay. Oh,
Lanyard.
really?
First presentation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh. Wow, I did not catch on to that at all.
Yeah, no, I was
That took me a minute. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was real slick. Oh, okay.
Honestly, I'm glad I caught at the end.
Yeah,
That was
okay.
not gonna happen.
Why did I make this image, bro? All right, so now I'm gonna talk about a little bit about Windows red teaming. I'm gonna go over persistence, initial access, kind of, I guess, authentication bypasses, PrivEsk, which is again kind of, because we already have like the Windows equivalent of sudo admin privileges, and then memory leaks. Oh, it's gonna be a fun time. All right, so in the past, our tool dev was kind of poor, so we used to use a lot of pre-made things. We took advantage of the Metasploit framework, which is a popular pen testing framework, to generate our payloads and actually perform the exploits. This is very useful in most real-world scenarios, especially when you're doing stuff on the fly. So the basic usage of this would be like to set up a listener, use a pre-made exploit to exploit the vulnerability, have the code that's now on the target system call back to your listener in profit pretty much. This is kind of what we're going for when we're doing like Windows tools that we kind of take well, personally me, I try to replicate pre-made stuff because it's easier to do. Next slide. Okay, yeah. So like I was saying before, MetaInterpreter has a lot of modules built into it. We can use Mimikatz to dump creds. There's PowerShell modules to run execute PowerShell commands on the box. And there's a Wireshark module. I didn't know that until like I did a little research on that. And like I said, yeah, it's very useful in those scenarios where we cannot make payload on the fly. Again, like I was saying, pre-made stuff. There's a thing called PowerShell Empire. It's a post exploitation framework similar to Metasploit. Comes with a wealth of tools, and it gives us direct access to Win32 API or just Win API. Like I said before, making tools for Windows is extremely complicated. It doesn't have to be, but it is, sadly. And this gives us a framework the basis of. And it actually is coming back, but Defender catches it easily. That's kind of the deal with a lot of this pre-made stuff. Defender catches it like that, so it's whatever. But okay. So, like Michael Vaughn was talking about before, persistence is very key. Persistence is an art. Picture this: you're in the box. How you got in that box and you're alive, your low-hanging fruit / beacons get shut down. How are you going to stay in that box, right? It's pretty hard, in all honesty. We take advantage of a lot of like protocols that are being used for scoring to maintain access to the box, like ICMP, DNS, SMB, and also taking advantage of Windows because Windows is massive. There's these things called LO binaries, which is living off of LAN binaries, and I reference them all the time. Taking advantage of these pre-made services to maintain access. Sorry, Jason. Yeah. Okay. So similar to cron jobs, we have in Windows scheduled tasks. I would consider this low-hanging fruit because it's pretty easy to get rid of these. But it's one of the most basic forms of using persistence. Yeah, it will only run if the user that owns the task is logged in. So say you are the user, let's say Sally. The scheduled tasks that are in Sally's user will only run for her when she logs in. So this is good for us, especially when you only have 1 or 2 users on the box. We use our Ansible deploy and auto run. That will start our script that calls back. Like this one here, when key R, scheduled tasks, delete all. It's pretty easy to catch. You can also catch it with the sysinternals tool, auto run. This is, like I said, what I consider low-hanging fruit. Very easy to find. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we also take advantage of shares in SMB, like I mentioned before. SMB is vital to normal Windows operation. But like I said before, it can be used against you. Taking advantage of these things that are already built into Windows, so you don't have to pre-make anything that's crazy complicated. And yeah. We also use PSExec to execute stuff on the box, but this starts a service, and if a blue team is monitoring that service, it will automatically get caught. And then net use, yeah. I don't know a lot about net use. I just included it on here, but yeah. Okay. The registry. I talked about this in my last red team presentation. The registry is massive. It's massive. The registry is pretty much just a collection of settings for the system, right? How do I think of it? I think of it like a massive database, a big tree, if you will. The tree reference is used a lot, but there are, 4 to 5 main hives that break down into smaller hives that go into the configurations for each user and or service, if I remember correctly. So the HKCU, like I was saying before, the auto runs, you can set auto runs inside of the registry, so you don't actually have to navigate the GUI. This is another way to easily find auto runs, like I mentioned before. Just go into the registry editor and then go to that hive and view that. The run and run once run within the user level, like I mentioned before. The HKLM registry hive run at system level though. So that's the next one. You can start putting stuff in to maintain persistence. And then yeah, everything's picked up by auto runs. If you really want to start looking into persistent mechanisms, you should go and look into how you maintain persistence with registry. Very large thing, but very useful in red teaming. Okay, registry continued. There's another silly little thing within the Windows registry called app init DLL, which will automatically inject the DLLs that we're in with that are described in the registry key into every running process. Um, we used to take advantage of this. However, there was an incident that led to the blue screening of multiple boxes because code was not tested. Excuse me. Um, However, in order for you to do this, like realistically, the DLL needs to be signed, but you can disable that, which can be viewed as good or bad. But yeah, it's a very useful way. Like I said before, the registry is very massive and it's very useful in maintaining persistence and doing things automatically. Um, Here, there's a little DLL on the bottom that was compiled that broke boxes. And yeah, like I said before, registry's massive. You can start modifying, adding to, and hijacking firewall rules through the actual registry, right? So a lot of times, what I like to do is go through and start flushing firewall rules, and that's done by a simple little registry modification through PowerShell. Also, you know how Jason mentioned how we collect passwords? That's also done for the registry. You're able to set a registry value to something called a password filter, which will automatically call our little DLL that's described within the registry, um, that compares your password to our what our good values are, opens up a socket and sends it back to our C2. So again, registry, persistence, right? Um, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Most changes to the registry require a logout. So if I go in and make some change to the registry values, I have to log you out to log back in for those changes to get put into effect. So yeah. So another mechanism of persistence is services. I described auto runs, like I said before, they're very easy to find, but services are a little more persistent. All the services are managed by the service control manager, which is a SVCH host. Um, and these services run at like the local system, local service, and network service, which is above the normal user. So it's like Windows versions of sudo, like I mentioned before. Um, these run in the background. These are not directly seen within Task Viewer or what is it called? Process Explorer. But yeah, this is very important because we're able to inject stuff and then run as a service, pretty much. Another mechanism of persistence you will see during the comp. So then, like I said before, we begin to abuse services to maintain persistence. You can load different binaries into your local system service. I do this. It's very nice. And then you can also use services to. You can also break services using accounts. So say you change the password of the user that takes advantage of the service to one of your own, pretty much. Right, Smash. Okay, good. Thank you. Like I mentioned before, you write your own service and then you use the maintain persist. When API is scary, I will say, like I was saying before, we used to take advantage of a lot of like pre-made, off-the-shelf modules and exploits, but we're starting to move away from that now, right? We're getting into the habit of actually taking advantage of the WinAPI functionality and programming your own malware. And yeah, if you use C Sharp or C++, you have full access to WinAPI to take advantage, like I mentioned before. There's not really much you can't do. However, a lot of these executables that you create are hard to hide from Process Explorer, like I was saying before. Yeah, hard. What do I mean by that? They're hard. But again, Windows API, if you want to dive down that rabbit hole, you can do some pretty funky stuff. Windows is massive. Everything in Windows is massive. Um, yeah, yeah. This also mentions using these tools like Task Manager will actually Process Explorer. It's an easy way to catch things that are not signed directly by Microsoft, meaning that it is a Microsoft like licensed product, I guess you could say. None of our stuff is going to be signed. So none of our stuff is going to be signed. Yeah, it's an easy way to catch a lot of the stuff that it should not be running in the box. So make sure you guys are using that. I always push that. Make sure you use Process Explorer. Once again, Windows is massive. It's this thing called group policy. Hypothetically, if your system's on the domain and we own the domain controller, we can start to spread our nice, fun stuff on all the boxes that are on the domain. So, like I was mentioning before, you can push persistence to the registry just based off of by using the client that's on the domain. And we can do things like the SMTP1 or downgrade authentication from net LM to LM. I'm not going to go into that because it's a little too advanced for this talk, I guess. You can enable the schedule tasks to forge golden tickets, which is a method of, oh my goodness, my words are slipping. I'm sorry. You can forge golden tickets, which are used. Yeah, I know it's carb roasting, but I was also going to mention silver tickets, but that's like service accounts, and then that's yeah. I don't want to go down that wormhole. But yeah, you can push your persistence to all the machines that are on the domain if you have control of the domain controller. Like I was saying before, very massive, very big. Oh my goodness. Okay, so you can also be very mean and start disabling other things, like disable users' access to the registry, disallow certain programs, cough cough, blue team scripts, prevent uses of CMD, also prevent uses of PowerShell. So I yoink your GUI and I yoink your access to the command line, which is pretty funny actually. And you can also print meme messages to people that are logging in. We do that a lot. We'll let you know that we still have persistence by using an auto run to pop up a message box saying that we still have persistence. Um, but yeah, many things aren't documented well understood. Like I was saying before, it's very hard to program stuff for Windows. The Windows API is very undocumented, very scary. So, yeah, yeah. Also, yeah, we can touch on this. Other things that just happen to work during comps, right? Backdooring shortcuts, so we'll just change the icon profile of a shortcut and change what the actual program is, and that's just our persistence mechanism. You're clicking sysinternals, and it's not actually sysinternals. The sticky keys thing also still works. It allows you to get a system shell without authentication. We pretty much keylogger, right? Living off the land, right? Taking advantage of these things that are already built into Windows to scrape passwords. Yeah, we don't do this anymore. The gathering registry hives and extracting hashes. We don't need that. We have other mechanisms to collect passwords. Yeah. I also wanted to touch on the fact that we don't, since we already have access to all the boxes are pre-baked, we don't do as much privilege escalation. We do more of pivoting. So, like my mom says, take what you get and don't have a fit. As you see me as an attacker, right? I can't get through because your firewall rules are so good, but the box that I have in playing one that just has the PSN's console open, so I'm just gonna go in and flush the firewall rules. Like, you know what I mean? You guys need to make sure that you are actually managing access controls to other systems. We also do a little funny thing where we like to take the other system that we have access to. So if I have a beacon on the computer over here, but it can't get through because somehow you blocked our line and AWS IP that may or may not be to I'm going to start taking the other boxes. I mean, it's not really the best, but it's pivoting. So yeah, and I think that's it. No, Jason. Any questions? I'm sorry, I kind of just ran for like 10 minutes. That was a lot. No questions? Okay. Yes.
Where would we go if we want to learn more about Windows API?
That's kind of hard to answer because there's so many resources spread out. I know MSDN is starting to get better than Microsoft documentation. Oh my goodness, I have resources, but I cannot think of the links off the top of my head. Most of the time, if I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to do, there'll be random like code snippets online that I'm able to piece together. There's a lot of like Chinese researchers doing stuff, and they'll post their code snippets. There's also some American security researchers that are posting on blogs. Like I said, if you DM me, I can like dump you a whole lot. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Two questions. One, what's your personally favorite thing to do as a red teamer when on Windows? And second, is there any like purely red team competition? Because most time I see red team is just during being the adversary in a blue team competition.
Yeah. Okay. So personally, I don't know. I've gotten into the habit of like just trolling like blue teamers, and I'll start opening up like white papers and like documentation to stuff that's not actually in the box. So a little bit of like psychological warfare there. You know what I mean? Um, what else? I also like to help the blue team, especially when people don't know what they're doing. I'll open up like help guides to get rid of what I have on the box. And then you said your second question. I don't know, Elijah. I really don't know. Most of the time, it's always blue versus red, or it's like purple team. I don't know how a red team comp would go. I mean, it's kind of more like try hack me, hack the box, like testing. I feel CPTC. Oh yeah, CPTC. Yeah, that is true. That's purely red, but it's still it's like well, no, it's red team. It is red team. Yeah. Any more questions? No. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna breeze through the rest of this really quickly. I got 2 slides and 3 slides, and we're done. So, networking for red team. So generally speaking, with routers, there's not much that we do with them, mostly because we like to pass traffic too. So if we can't talk to the host box, that's not good for us. So generally, we like to keep firewalls bad. Firewall rules are bad, so we get rid of them. We always want to have access. So like if we need to get rid of firewalls, we can do that. So pfSense, there's plenty of talks that I've done about pfSense, but basically you got pfSense, which is GUI around packet filter, which is running on BSD, free BSD in this case. So you need to make sure you understand like all 3 layers of that. So you can attack the web app, which is PHP, or you can go after packet filter itself, which is pretty great. Then you can also attack FreeBSD when we're talking about pfSense. But most routers work the same way. You have a GUI, some routing software, some underlying hardware. Palo Alto, you have the Palo Alto GUI. They're now running PanOS, but that comes. It used to be running off of CentOS, which is really interesting, and you can kind of do that with anything else. They're always running on some sort of software. You got BIOS, which is running on Debian, which is also just a pretty terrible router, anyways, but it exists. So that's kind of routers. Yeah. So if you block red team traffic, we don't like that. We don't like losing beacons, so we're gonna remove the firewall rules. The underlying hardware can run services. It has users. It has config files. We can do all the same things we just talked about on a router. So I'm not gonna get that. We're not gonna dive too much deeper into that. But networking for red team is pretty fun stuff. This is also where we get into like proxies and other random stuff. So yeah, some tool development tips. Um, Now we have to use all the things that we just talked about against the blue team. So you need to pick an OS to program for, maybe Linux, networking, or Windows. Then you gotta bounce some ideas off of people, get some brainstorming going. We have a red team tools idea repository. It will be public by the end of the semester once we get that set up and we have some cycles. And just be creative. Um, it's really easy to start like figuring out what to do and how to break stuff once you know what's normal. So understanding exactly how everything works and how it's understanding why it works and how it works are like the 2 biggest things to starting off a red team. If you know what a service file is supposed to look like, you can also understand how you can use all those service options to make it like work. You can bend it into what you want to do with it once you know how it works. So you can go look at reports, you can go look at tools, and just practice. Set up infrastructure, deploy it against yourself, deploy on localhost, all this good stuff. If you're struggling to come up with an idea, you can look at the tools repository, you can look at public tools that already are out there. Don't work if it already exists. Use it as motivation, use it as inspiration. Like say you want to learn C or you want to learn Go, and you see like a tool that's written in Python, rewrite it in that language. Cool, that's a great idea. If your first tool doesn't come out amazing, don't be discouraged. My first tool was a little bash script that changed the keyboard layout from like English to Dvorak, and it didn't work. But I still dropped it. Nothing happened because it was bash. So if you're dropping something that doesn't work, make sure it actually doesn't do anything bad. Or start dropping in general. Cool. So questions? No questions? You guys all understood all of that? Dang, Club got smart. It's crazy. Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, if you want to learn more about stuff, we have Red Team Recruiting on Thursday, 7 p.m. in Golisano, 2750, aka Air Gap. Come, have fun. We do some development capabilities, and that's it. So thank you for your time. enjoy the demo time. The demo for this week is actually just something that Alex is going to tell you all about.